BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. And hello everybody, today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. In this episode I will be discussing Stephen Paddock, the Las Vegas shooter of 2017, and he perpetrated one of the deadliest shootings in American history. And first I would like to give a shout out to Cat Daddy Steve, who requested an episode on this for the Anything Goes Friday segment. And if you have an idea for a future episode, you can put it in the comments section down below, and perhaps it will be worked into a future episode of Black Box Online Radio. I also release shorts on YouTube almost every day, and they also come out on Instagram and Facebook, BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram, and my personal Facebook is under the name of Ned DeHaan. But this is a very tragic story because all around the world, people were talking about the Las Vegas shooting because of the magnitude of this event. And people could tell that it was a very calculated shooting. It was a crime that was very deliberate, and it wasn't simply a fit of anger where someone perpetrated this crime because they were frustrated about something. An enormous amount of detail was put into the planning process. Before I go any further, I would like to say rest in peace to the victims. And some people wonder when we discuss serial killers and mass shooters in the media and on YouTube, are we focusing too much on the killer and not enough on the victims? And what I had to learn over the years was we can leave the grieving process and the mourning process mostly to the families, and they can choose how they want to share the stories of their loved ones whom they knew personally. And what I try to do on this channel is to understand how these crimes happen and to just bring some awareness to that. And the grand hope is, I mean this in the ideal sense, the grand hope is that these crimes will not happen again in the future, some way, somehow, down the line. But Stephen Paddock was born on April 9th of 1953, and he passed away on October 1st of 2017. And that's the same date of the shooting. He committed suicide as the police were zoning in on him, and officially, he is responsible for the deaths of 60 people, 61 if you include himself, and 413 people were injured by the gunfire, and 867 is the total count of injuring. So 413 people were injured by the gunfire, and then other people were hit by shrapnel or some other type of injury associated with the mass shooting. Now, this is a very different type of mass shooting because normally you would have somebody walking into a place like a school or walking into a crowded area, pulling out a gun and then shooting people. But what Stephen Paddock did was not enter the crowded area. He was in a hotel room that was overlooking a music festival that was taking place. I would like to provide the most basic introduction to this tragic event. On the night of October 1st, 2015, starting at around 10:05 p.m., Stephen Paddock fired more than 1,000 rounds from his hotel room at the Mandalay Bay Hotel and Casino onto a large crowd of concert-goers at the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival on the Las Vegas Strip, ultimately killing 60 and wounding others. He then shot and killed himself. On September 25th, 6 days before the shooting, he checked into the hotel with 10 shooting range bags and a computer. Now I have to stop right there. This is something that a lot of people have drawn attention to, and they're just wondering, how is nobody suspicious of this? This guy is just going in to a high-end hotel with all of these weapons, as stated, in bags that don't necessarily conceal what they are. I mean, some people might recognize them and figure out what he was doing, or just nobody is suspicious that one person is entering a hotel room with all of this. And I once appeared on the Professor Dad channel, which has since been renamed, and I was discussing this with Thomas Horan and Drew Beeson, two of the other people there. And what Drew and I were going back and forth about the Las Vegas shooting was how are more people not aware of this? And something that I brought up was that after the shooting, people on all sides of the political aisle were suspicious of these events. They were like, now wait a second, there is this very, very saddening event that took place. People on the right are like, hey, what's going on? The story sounds fishy. People on the left were like, hey, wait a second, what's going on? The story sounds fishy. I was looking at all types of posts from people who were following the news, and they were simply doubting a lot of things, or they just couldn't quite comprehend certain aspects of the story about how this person was able to bring at least 24 firearms up to his hotel room at the Mandalay Bay Casino and fire off 1,000 rounds, which took more than 10 minutes to do. And he was able to do this by using using bump stocks for some of the weapons, not all of them. For example, some of them wouldn't even require one. But people had their suspicions. Now, some of the early news coverage back in 2017 shared some basic info about Stephen Paddock. Number one, he was not the typical mass shooter. He was someone who was reasonably wealthy, not the richest person in the world on par with Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, but reasonably wealthy. He had millions to his name. He earned a lot through real estate investing. He was a postal clerk for a while, but mostly he earned money through real estate investing. But at the time of the shooting, he was a high-stakes gambler. And as I understand, one possibility as to how he was able to get all of these weapons into his hotel room without anybody checking was the hotel room was something that was given to him by the Mandalay Bay because he was a frequent visitor, and as previously stated, he was a high-stakes gambler, working with tens of thousands of dollars at a time, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars. So a $594 hotel room was really nothing to the casino. And at the time, high-stakes gambling was reported to have been his primary form of income, and he had experienced some things that I'll talk about later on in this episode. But when I heard all of these things, real estate investor, professional gambler, I began to wonder, is this going to be something that is going to tie into a type of glory killing, or someone wanted to commit these crimes for glory, thrill kills, fueling his own excitement? And if you don't think that that sets him apart from a lot of other mass shooters, how about this? He was married multiple times, and he also had a girlfriend whom he sent away and sent $150,000 to. Very different. I think a lot of people formulate this thing in their minds about how that a mass shooter is going to be someone who is the sad little man, someone who can't bond with anybody, somebody like the Isla Vista shooter whose initials begin with E and R, or maybe even somebody like Nicholas Cruz from Florida, who are just rejected individuals from society who don't have very strong abilities at forming relationships. But that's not the case at all. Human beings don't necessarily fall into these types of boxes, and Stephen Paddock is a very clear example of that. He was a mass shooter who had been married multiple times. He had money. He had opportunities. Now, what else could have been going on? Well, let's find out through some of these things here. And I'm going to go over to an article that is from NBC News. Normally, I don't like them as a source, but this one was actually pretty good, and it came out in 2019, roughly 2 years after the shooting. And it said, Vegas gunman Stephen Paddock was inspired by his father's criminal reputation. Let's read on here. A high-stakes gambler who rained a hail of gunfire on a crowd of country music fans, killing 58, and other sources say that it was 60, took any specific motive from the 2007 attack to his grave. The FBI said Tuesday as it concluded the investigation into the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. The agency found no single or clear motive or factor to explain why Stephen Paddock carried out the attack from his suite in a high-rise casino. The 64-year-old fatally shot himself as the police closed in. And I also have to throw in another interjection. This is just some stuff that I'm sharing from watching shows like CSI and Law and Order. I mean, fictional TV shows do talk about this stuff frequently. The early 60s is a time of very high risk of suicide, particularly in males. And I'm not even going to get into the reasons why, but I think you can figure out something. Someone's approaching the end of their life and they feel like they haven't done enough. And I just want to leave that as the nutshell version. And I'm going to continue with this NBC News article. It wasn't about MGM, Mandalay Bay, or any specific casino or venue. Aaron Rouse, the agent in charge of the FBI's Las Vegas office, told the Associated Press. It was about doing the maximum amount of damage and obtaining some type of infamy. Yes, infamy, glory, thrill killing. I think all of those would be intertwined. The finding was contained in a long-awaited report compiled by the FBI's Behavior Analysis Unit, a group of experts who spent months examining several factors that might have led to the rampage. This report comes as close to understanding the why as we're ever going to get. I mean, they gotta do more than that, though. Almost 900 people were hurt during the October 1st, 2017 attack. Stephen Paddock wanted to die in infamy, and he was inspired in part by his father's reputation as a bank robber. His father was once placed on the FBI's most wanted list, the report said. In many ways, he was similar to other active shooters the FBI has studied. Okay, he's similar, but and to some of them, yes, absolutely, to some of them. But I've pointed out several differences already compared to some of the famous active shooters in American history. I brought up ER and Nicholas Cruz. A lot of the school shooters that have talked about are high school students themselves, although not all of them. And there was even, one story that's just come to mind right now about a man who went to the school of his ex-wife's children to commit the shooting, and he was, of course, much older. As I said, his ex-wife's children were at the school, and they aren't even his own biological kids, and he committed a shooting there. Lots of adults commit these types of crimes, and there are even other similar events that aren't necessarily mass shootings. Look at the Bath School massacre that was committed by Andrew Kehoe back in the 1920s. That was an extremely deadly attack that was done using explosives, particularly dynamite. But that is also one that was perpetrated by an adult, and Andrew Kehoe was married. His wife was named Nellie Kehoe, was also murdered in a different way, in somewhat of a more, she was murdered and then her body was posed in somewhat of a ritualistic way. So I think that Stephen Paddock matches some of these mass killers in America, but in some ways he is quite different, because he is not a sad, lonely teenager who cannot bond with his peers. He's a guy who should have had everything. And I'm going to be very blunt about something. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. It appears that he was dealing with some types of mental instability issues. Some people think that it could have been bipolar disorder or an anxiety disorder. I mean, he was medicated for an anxiety disorder, so that should have played a role in it. But lots of people have bipolar disorder or anxiety disorders, and they don't go on to commit mass shooters. Is this article going to reveal anything that could be greater? The gunman was not directed or inspired by any group and was not seeking any further agenda. He did not leave a manifesto or suicide note, and federal agents believe he had planned to fatally shoot himself after the attack. Well, that's definitely similar to a lot of the people that I've talked about, ranging from Andrew Kehoe to Elliot Rodger. They all died after the attacks. Paddock was a retired postal service worker, accountant, real estate investor who owned rental properties and homes in Reno, and he also had a pilot's license and liked to gamble tens of thousands of dollars at high-stakes video poker. His younger brother Eric Paddock called him a king of microaggression, narcissistic, detail-oriented, maybe bored enough to commit an attack that would make him famous. His ex-wife told investigators that he grew up with a single mom in a financially unstable home, and he felt a need to be self-reliant. Now, there are several videos of Eric Paddock, the brother of Stephen Paddock, on YouTube, and the absolute first video that I decided to watch about this case was from Eric Paddock, and just talking about his brother's non-existent criminal history. And firstly, I saw longtime BBOR listener Super Strike 9 in the comments section, providing some clarity on some discussions. So, hello to Super Strike. And I also noticed that his brother said very clearly he had no criminal history. He didn't even have parking tickets or traffic violations, and he didn't see the warning signs. And it can become very difficult to try and determine what warning signs are, because I have found once the family members start talking more and more and more and more, that the warning signs become very apparent, and then they're like, oh yeah, well, I guess that did happen. Police characterized him, this is back to the NBC article, police characterized him as a loner with no religious or political affiliations, who began stockpiling weapons about a year before the attack. He spent more than $1.5 million in the 2 years before the shooting and distanced himself from his family. He sent his girlfriend, Mary Lou Danley, to visit her family in the Philippines 2 weeks before the attack and wired her $150,000. Danley was a former casino worker in Reno and returned to the U.S. after the shooting and told the authorities that Paddock had complained that he was sick and that he had a chemical imbalance. Danley, who is Catholic, told investigators that Paddock often told her, "Your God doesn't love me." And this is something that I think I read on the Wikipedia page, but it might have been from a different article. There was a report from the Islamic State, like from ISIS, claiming responsibility for the attack, saying that Stephen Paddock had converted to Islam 6 months before the shooting, and that appears to be completely false. And that makes you question all of these things going out about the Islamic State, ISIS, ISIL, whether or not they're actually responsible for the attacks that they claim they are, and that's a whole different episode. But the reason why this line is included here in the article is it has nothing to do with Stephen Paddock being an atheist. It just means to show that he didn't have a larger political agenda, and he frequently said that thing, "Your God doesn't love me." It wasn't a religiously motivated killing. It wasn't a politically motivated killing, although there was at least one source that said that he became somewhat of a supporter of Adolf Hitler, or spoke favorably of Hitler. But again, he doesn't seem like he had any direct cause behind the shooting, and that's why it was so puzzling, and that's why, as I said at the beginning of this episode, I began to think, alright, it sounds like this guy is just doing this for thrill killing. His own brother said he got bored enough to do it. He's done so many things. He is a millionaire, he is a pilot, professional poker player, buying lots of houses. And another detail that I read in at least one source said that he had been on over 20 cruises around the world. And could this just have been somebody who was getting older and he felt that he was not going to accomplish more in life, so he wanted to do something very destructive? And it even says this in the NBC article. He wanted to commit as much destruction as he could, commit and create as much damage as he could before he took his own life. And his own brother said he's the king of microaggressions. I think all of that is tying in. And that's what I meant, though, when I said that there are these reports from the family members. No, there are absolutely no warning signs. No, I could never have foreseen this. But then they say, oh, yeah, well, he was extremely narcissistic and he was aggressive. And then it slowly builds up. Again, not all narcissists go on to become mass shooters, so people might not process it immediately. But once you put all the pieces together, it can appear that there's a lot more than meets the eye, and it's a little clearer to understand. And there was a rather bizarre article that was written in the New York Times about this, and it's called "Gunman in 2017 Las Vegas Shooting Was Angry at Casinos," and it's actually written by an individual named Serge Kovaleski. Some people might recognize that name, Serge Kovaleski, and it more or less went into detail about how Stephen Paddock was very frustrated at the casinos because, again, he was a high-stakes poker player. At the time of his death, he said that poker was his primary source of income, and that they had done certain things about lowering the benefits that would have been available to high-stakes poker players, cutting back on certain things. The perks wouldn't have been as extreme or intense as they used to be, and he seemed very frustrated by that, and he told people very, very vividly that he was frustrated by that. But I don't think that could ever drive somebody to commit murder of that magnitude. I mean, we're not even talking about murder. We're talking about someone who brought multiple firearms, perhaps 24 firearms, into a hotel over a period of 5 days, completely staked out the event to commit a mass attack. And that is definitely not somebody who's just mad about the benefits that the casinos are getting. And as I said, it was a weird article because I didn't really think that it was going anywhere. And I'm just going to read a segment of it for you. The man who fatally shot 60 people at an outdoor music festival in Las Vegas in 2017 had been angry over what he saw as casinos scaling back perks for VIP gamblers like himself, according to an account provided to the FBI. The newly released FBI records fall short on answering lingering questions of why the gunman Stephen Paddock opened fire on a country music concert crowd on the Las Vegas Strip from his perch on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Resort. By the time the authorities had arrived at his suite, Paddock, age 64, had killed himself, not leaving a suicide note nor any indication. The October 1st event saw 60 people die and injured hundreds more. It was the deadliest shooting in modern U.S. history. Investigators have long scoured the case for their explanations, but a few years ago, Las Vegas police concluded their investigation by saying that there was no clear motive. Investigators and behavioral analysts at the FBI similarly concluded in 2019 that they could not determine a single or clear motivating factor behind the attack. Investigators said that it appeared Mr. Paddock had wanted to die by suicide after experiencing a decline in physical and mental health. The newly released reports of the FBI interviews with people who knew or interacted with Mr. Paddock made public in recent days shed some new light on what has been known as an obsessive high roller with gambling habits and his state of mind before he unleashed a barrage of gunfire from his hotel window. Mr. Paddock, who sometimes spent up to 18 hours a day gambling in various hotels, was very upset at the way casinos were treating him and the other high rollers, someone told the FBI. Now, I mean, it sounds like they're just downplaying this whole situation, and these people are doing themselves absolutely zero favors for presenting the material like that. Like, this guy murdered 60 people in an extremely calculated event that he set 5 days up, that took him 5 days to set up. Well, he was mad that he wasn't getting his member benefits as a VIP from a hotel. No way. I mean, I can understand how that would be frustrating, but to plan a shooting of this magnitude, and I also don't mean to jump ahead too much, but this is exactly the problem. Stephen Paddock had planned a previous shooting, and I'm just going off of memory on some of this. The original location for the shooting was Chicago, Illinois, during the music event Lollapalooza, and he wanted to find an opportunity to commit the shooting into a concert or a crowd, a festival, a very large group of people, and he would just start firing the shots, and it would create an enormous amount of destruction. He would kill many people before taking his own life. Heavily planned in advance, extremely premeditated, and I really don't think that losing member benefits as a high-stakes gambler would cause the premeditation. I mean, that's just my take on the subject. So when the FBI comes out and makes a statement like that, well, maybe he wasn't getting the member benefits that they want. I know it's probably something that they found and they're putting in their files, but they make it sound like it's the heart and soul of the issue, and these people are doing themselves no favors at all. They're just making themselves look suspicious. I'm going to continue with the New York Times article. The fellow gambler said that Mr. Paddock and gamblers like him would frequently carry $100,000 in cash and had a bankroll of approximately $2 to $3 million. He described Mr. Paddock as personable and intelligent, and like all professional gamblers, Mr. Paddock frequently kept to himself. Now here's something very important. Not all mass shooters or serial killers keep to themselves. There's definitely this expectation out there that the person is a sad, lonely man who has no friends, and he just likes to spend all of his time alone and just kind of brooding and sulking and moping. Loads of serial killers lead very active lifestyles, are very sociable and outgoing, and they have jobs that require them to be sociable and outgoing. Mass shooters as well can be very involved with extracurricular activities for some of the younger ones. Sometimes you might even see that they're an athlete or a former athlete, or sometimes you'll see that they are involved with certain groups of friends and certain circles of friends, and just the friends were also completely caught off guard and shocked about everything that took place. The sad, lonely man thing is not true for everyone. Continuing with the article, a woman who worked for the Tropicana Las Vegas resort told the FBI that Mr. Paddock visited about once every 3 months, and he was a prolific video poker player. The woman said that he did not talk about anything personal with her, but he appeared to like rock and roll and had attended some concerts at the Tropicana. According to documents, he stayed at the Tropicana beginning a couple weeks before the shooting and lost $38,000 during the visit. Well, if he regularly carries $100,000 with him, that doesn't even seem like something that would also be a big enough loss to drive him like this and push him over the edge. The documents revealed that A different interviewee told the FBI that over dinner at Applebee's, Mr. Paddock shared with him that gambling has been his main source of income and that he brought a handgun for protection. Well, he had multiple firearms actually with him, and that is well, more than just a handgun. He had like 23 other firearms with him. One person reported being a business acquaintance of Mr. Paddock told agents in 2016, about a year before the shooting, Mr. Paddock was stockpiling money and was mad at the system. While large portions of this and other sections of the interview notes were redacted, the former acquaintance reported that Mr. Paddock had been fascinated by the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people in 1995. That, of course, was Timothy McVeigh. And I think that that's going somewhere. Finally, that's going somewhere. What could have been a motive for this? Somebody who, again, thinks he's at the end of his life, even though he wasn't. He was only 64. Someone who is frustrated. Someone who feels that he has been cheated out of things, partnered with mental instability, having an anxiety disorder, possible bipolar disorder, and he begins to look at an exit strategy, as gruesome as it sounds. And he could have been inspired by Timothy McVeigh. Also, the fact that his father was a bank robber. I said that a little bit quickly during that segment, but that's what that NBC News article was all about, talking about how Stephen Paddock's own father was indeed a bank robber, criminal history in the family, partnered with criminal events being shared in the media. And if you think that I'm insinuating that the media could possibly be creating these killers, halfway yes, halfway no. It definitely broadcasts these stories all across the country and all across the world, and people are just like, well, now wait a second, they're like, you're just giving these terrible, terrible events more and more publicity, and not something like this episode where we're trying to analyze things. They just simply say a shooting occurred and this is the weapon that was used, and that's it. That's all the news will say, and they'll talk about how many people were killed using this type of weapon, and that's all the news will say during the breaking news segments. That's what could possibly be contributing to these events. And I have one final thing to share in this episode, and that is a statement that was made from Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo. This is from Las Vegas, and I'm just going to read this. Las Vegas police closed their investigation, and Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo declared that the police work was complete after hundreds of hours of interviews and thousands of hours of investigative work. Lombardo vowed to never speak Paddock's name again in public. And this is from the article that was put out in 2019. What a ridiculous statement. What a nonsensical statement. He's never going to say Stephen Paddock's name again in public? Excuse me, what if you learned something new about the investigation? What if you learned the true motive? What if you learned what was actually going on? You're saying, case closed, we won't talk about this anymore. This is why people are suspicious. This is why people begin to suspect that something more sinister is going on behind the scenes, that certain things are set up, or that certain people are being brainwashed into committing crimes like this, because it just looks like they're playing the game of, oh, well, case closed, we're not going to talk about it anymore, and we're going to hope that the general public forgets. And I think that that's very bizarre, and no matter what, conspiracy or not, that is a bad way to handle the situation, and a bad way to manage the information. What do you think? What would you like to say about Stephen Paddock, the Las Vegas shooter? Are you doubtful of the official narrative? Do you think one man could have pulled this off by himself, bringing 24 firearms into the hotel room at the Mandalay Bay? Are there any shooters or murderers in American history that remind you of the story of Stephen Paddock? What do you think about any of the psychological assessments that I talked about how he was someone who thought that he was at the end of his life, he wanted to commit a thrill-kill set of murders? Or perhaps even he was just somebody who wanted to leave the world with a bunch of destruction and carnage and chaos. Or maybe it's even using the language of one of the articles talking about how he just wanted to obtain infamy, and that these were glory-themed killings to fuel his own excitement, his reputation, as well as to do something that had a very, very large impact on not only the United States of America, but the entire world. What do you think about all of those statements? Please put your ideas in the comment section down below. Share anything you want about the story. And if you have a future idea for the Anything Goes Friday segment, you can let me know in the comments section again. You can also write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. That's really good for sending larger things, including attachments. And that will be all for me now. Once again, feel free to check out Instagram and Facebook every day for reels. They're also available here on YouTube. And please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already to this channel. And until next time.